You want to hear something silly? Bears can't parallel park. You want to hear something even sillier? Darwin thought that bears could turn into whales. Back in the 1800s, when Darwin first published The Origin of Species, this is exactly what he said. And he was brutally mocked by scientists of his day for thinking something so ridiculous. He even retracted the idea from later editions of his book. But here's the kicker. Scientists of today think essentially the same thing. Stupid Darwin thinks bears could have turned into whales. How ridiculous. Everyone knows these wolf, pig, weasel, hippo things or it turned into whales. My, how the tables have turned. Back in the 80s and the 90s, a series of fossils were found that rocked the evolutionary landscape. Paleontologists thought that they had found a clear transitional series of fossils documenting the evolution of whales. University of Chicago evolutionary biologist Jerry Coyne says in his book Why Evolution is True, whales happen to have an excellent fossil record, courtesy of their aquatic habits and robust, easily fossilized bones. This is one of our best examples of an evolutionary transition. Wow, one of the best. Let's take a look at the story behind whale evolution. Is it a good argument or not? So according to Coyne, whale evolution is such great evidence since we have a chronologically ordered series of fossils, and it goes something like this. The sequence begins with a raccoon-sized animal called Indohyus, living 48 million years ago. 52 million years ago, we see a wolf-sized creature called Pakicetus, which is a bit more whale-like than Indohyus. At 50 million years ago, there's the remarkable Ambulocetus. Rhodocetus, 47 million years ago, is even more aquatic. Finally, at 40 million years ago, we find the fossils Basilosaurus and Dorodon, before we have our modern whales. Let's take a look a little bit closer at this chronologically ordered series of fossils. If you're paying attention, you might be thinking something fishy is going on here, but no, you'd be wrong. That would not be a bad pun because whales are mammals, not fish. But also, yes, something mammally was going on here. Granting the standard Darwinian dates for these fossils, Indohyus is dated as far younger than his supposed descendants, and he's not the only one, more on that later. This is common practice in evolutionary analysis, to ignore where species actually show up in the fossil record and place them wherever makes Darwinian sense, creating what are called chronological inversions, or ghost lineages. Oh, that's so spooky. The fossil record often reveals fossils out of the order that they're supposed to be in. For just a couple of other examples, let's take a look at bird evolution. It's supposed to go theropod dinosaurs evolving into birds, with the fossil Archaeopteryx being evidence of this as an intermediate fossil. But the problem is he appears long before the dinosaurs he was supposed to have descended from. Evolution also got a big stick in its spokes with this guy, Tiktaalik, a fish-like creature that was for years crowned as the smoking gun transitional fossil of fish starting to go from the sea to the land. Brilliant evidence, just what they expected. Until in 2010, fossil footprints of true tetrapods were found in Poland, long before they were supposed to have evolved. And all of a sudden Tiktaalik was dethroned as a transitional fossil because again, the dates are all out of order. Hey everybody, I'd like you to meet my grandpa. Oh, so cute. Is that his name, or? No, his name is Seymour. He is my grandpa. What? Doesn't make any sense. Back to the chronologically ordered series of fossils, Basilosaurus and Dorodon are considered fully aquatic whales. They're not a transition to anything. Okay, maybe they're just trying to pad their numbers a little bit, big deal. Surely the rest of the fossils are intermediate and transitional, right? Well, that depends on how you define intermediate. In paleontology, intermediate doesn't mean what we think it means. Like my parents are intermediate between me and my Gam Gam and Pop Pop.
Oh, hello, sweetie.
Hi, Gam Gam.
Oh my, how tall you've grown. But you're so skinny. Would you like your Gam Gam to make you a nice pot pie? You know, staying healthy.
By intermediate, paleontologists usually mean a fossil is merely morphologically intermediate. In other words, if a fossil has features of a supposed ancestor and descendant, then it is classified as an intermediate or transitional fossil. But with that definition, I would be a morphological intermediate between this jockey and this professional basketball player. But that doesn't say anything about lineage, whether I'm an ancestor or descendant of either one. We could be completely unrelated, or even chronologically out of order, that wouldn't matter. The very thing they're trying to prove, the ancestral relationship, or how they came about, is pure assumption. This is how they can say there's tons of intermediate fossils and be technically correct, while at the same time skeptics can say, yeah, there aren't really any intermediate fossils, and also be correct. The fossil evidence is so meager that Darwinists, in order to prove evolutionary ancestry, they have to use a slippery definition that no one would accept in other areas of life. But for the sake of argument, let's ignore that problem because there's another one. Is there even enough time for the transition from land to water to hypothetically take place? Again, taking the standard evolutionary numbers for granted, we've got about 8 to 10 million years to go from the land mammal Pakicetus to fully aquatic whales. It sure seems like a whole lot of time. It's almost enough time for me to watch a Lord of the Rings marathon with someone who has a really small bladder. But is it enough time for whales to have evolved? The field of population genetics is devoted to calculating how long something like this would take. In the past, it was assumed that this was relatively simple to do, as easy as falling off a log. But more recently, scientists at Cornell University calculated how long it would take for different organisms to evolve 2 simple, beneficial mutations. For fruit flies with their relatively large population sizes and speedy generation times, it'd only take a few million years for 2 mutations to become fixed. For larger mammals like humans, who have much smaller population sizes and longer generation times, they calculated it would take over 200 million years. Again, that's only for 2 beneficial mutations. Okay, so where would whales and their supposed ancestors fall on that timescale? They're not as quick to reproduce as flies, but quicker than humans. So for 2 simple beneficial mutations, that's supposed to take roughly 43.3 million years. So the evidence shows, using their own assumptions and calculations, that they don't even have 1/4 of the time needed for even 2 simple mutations. And it takes quite a lot of changes to go from the land to the water, it turns out, including some of these lovely attributes.
Concurrent heat exchange system for intra-abdominal testes, ball vertebra for vertical swimming action, tail flukes and musculature for efficient power zones, blubber, temperature insulation, modified damage, to nurse young underwater, fetus and breathe position for labor underwater, special lung surfactants to be able to take in air after swimming at crushing depths, hormone strength, formative flippers, and reduction of line limbs, reduction of pelvis and sacral vertebra, reorganization, musculature for reproductive organs, modification of the teeth, modification of eye, front water vision, hydrodynamic properties of the skin, emergence pressure, mandibular fat pad with complex lipid distribution, reorganization of skull bone musculature, modification of air bones, decoupling its optics, trachea, emergence of blowhole musculature and neurological control, synthesis and metabolism of isovaleric acid, and more.
So, how many mutations does it take to change a Pachycetus? Ooh, I know this joke. 3. 1 to hold it and 2 to turn the ladder. How many mutations does it take to change a Pachycetus to a whale? Not where I would have gone with that joke, but what do I know? To put that in context, take giraffes and their derpy little short-necked pals, the okapi. They're quite similar, and a recent paper studied their differences and found surprisingly 70 different genes that likely contributed to the giraffe's appearance. If animals that similar required 70 gene changes for basically just a longer neck and stronger heart, it's a pretty safe bet that animals as different as Pachycetus and whales would require at least as many, and more likely many thousands more. But it gets worse. Recently, a new basilosaurid fossil was found in Antarctica that, even using the most generous dates for Darwinists, cuts down the time available for the whale transition to about half of the already not enough time of 8 million years, and could even place fully aquatic whales before Rhodocetus, before Ambulocetus, and contemporary with, or even before Pachycetus, destroying the entire fossil timeline. So is the whale transitional fossil series any good? Well, once you take into account the padding of their numbers, the chronological inversions, the ghost lineages, more recent fossil finds that discredit the timeline, and their creative use of definitions for what it even means to be a transitional fossil, the mathematical problems using their own numbers, they're all very clever tricks. But once you see how all of this works, it's quite a bit less impressive. To be fair, scientists aren't doing this maliciously. They really believe that evolution is just obviously true. So they reason, whether we have 8 million years or 4 million years, lots of fossils or no fossils. If evolution is true and we have whales today, then they must have been able to evolve, regardless of any problems that pop up. But if you don't presuppose evolution, if you treat it as a hypothesis rather than an assumption, then problems like these become far more difficult to hand-wave away. So these fossil finds certainly are interesting and worth debating, but there's a lot more to it than the uncritical, glossy, one-sided story being told. If this is one of the best evidences for evolution, what does that mean for their other evidence that's not as good?